There's a strange hush in the house at that hour. Not silence, exactly, but a kind of padded quiet. The hum of the fridge downstairs, the slow breath of pipes behind the walls, the creak of wood contracting in the cool. I wasn't fully asleep, just drifting, that weightless place between dreams and thoughts I'd been trying to outrun all week. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps, too slow to be casual, too careful to be sleepwalking. I opened my eyes a sliver, through the barely cracked door. Amber light spilled in from the hallway night light. And then a shadow moved across it, hesitant, almost familiar. A moment later, the door nudged open, and Sophia stepped inside. She paused like she was still giving me the chance to pretend to be asleep. I didn't. My voice came out groggy, but honest. Hey, everything okay? She smiled in the dark, her figure backlit and haloed in gold. The kind of soft glow you only see at the end of films, just before the screen fades to black. Sorry, she whispered. I couldn't sleep. Everyone else is out cold. Your mom snoring from 2 rooms over. I sat up slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. I was wearing just a thin t-shirt and sweatpants, the blanket falling off my legs as I shifted. Sophia walked in like she'd done this before. Not with me, but in life, a kind of practiced calm. She was in one of those long cotton robes, floral, but understated. Her hair was tied loosely back, and she carried a mug. Steam curled above it like breath in winter. Tea, she said softly, settling onto the edge of my bed. Chamomile. Don't worry. I brought enough for 2. She didn't hand me the mug yet, just held it between her palms like it was a small secret. You're always awake late, she said, eyes scanning the clutter of textbooks on my desk, the cracked phone screen beside the lamp. Thinking, or hiding, I half laughed. Bit of both? She tilted her head. Still planning to start your master's next fall? Trying to, I replied. But it feels like I've been trying for 2 years straight. Sophia nodded. Slowly, her voice softened. Your mom told me you were thinking of quitting. I didn't answer. You were the kid with the science fair trophies and color-coded notebooks, she added. Now you're 23 and still pacing in your childhood room. That's gotta feel strange. I swallowed, a tight knot forming behind my ribs. Yeah, it does. She passed me the mug. Her fingers grazed mine. Not intentionally, I don't think, but it made the hair on my arm lift. I won't pry, she said, voice low, but I know what it's like. To be surrounded by people who think they know your story, who think you're the one who lost momentum. There was something in her tone, not pity, something closer to kinship. I found myself watching the way her fingers rested on her lap, the way her breath slowed with mine. You seem like someone who had a different story written for her, I said quietly. Sophia gave a crooked little smile. Like I just said, something that mattered. I did. I tore out the last chapter a few years ago. A silence settled over the room. Not awkward, something softer. I could hear the faint click of the old wall clock downstairs. 11:47. Can I ask you something personal? She said. Suddenly, her voice didn't change, still low, but it carried more weight. Sure. She leaned in a little. Are you happy? The question felt too big to answer in words. I looked at the mug, still warm in my hands, at the mess of books I hadn't touched in weeks, at her, a woman my mother trusted, a woman I barely knew except for holidays and brief hallway conversations, now perched on my bed like a forgotten thought returning in the middle of the night. I don't think I even know what happy feels like anymore, I said. Sophia didn't flinch. Her gaze didn't drift. She just nodded, eyes unreadable, but open. Then maybe it's time, she whispered, to let someone offer you something different. I looked up, blinking. Something different? She tilted her head. Something special. If you're ready for it. Her voice didn't change, but the room did. The shadows thickened, the hum of silence louder somehow. She stood, just as slowly as she'd sat down. Her fingers reached for the door, But she paused, hand resting on the frame. I'm making tea again in the kitchen, she said, not turning around. If you want to talk more. Then she left. Bare feet, slow steps, hallway light fading. I stayed there, sitting in that half-warm spot where she'd been, wondering what, exactly, she meant, and why I suddenly couldn't remember what my life had looked like before she asked. The kitchen felt even larger at night, its corners dissolved into gray and the overhead bulb dimmed to a tired amber. I followed the faint sound of water settling into the kettle and found Sophia barefoot by the stove, robe hem brushing the linoleum. Outside, cricket song drifted through the screen window steady, patient. She glanced over her shoulder as though she'd heard my thoughts, not my footsteps. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Your fault, I said, managing a smile. She lifted one brow in gentle challenge, then turned the burner down. Steam coiled upward, catching the light like ribbons. 2 mugs waited on the counter, old stoneware, edges crazed with hairline cracks. She slid one toward me without a word, but didn't let go when my fingers curled around the handle. The shared grip warmed faster than the ceramic itself. We both pretended to adjust our hold and broke contact at the same moment, too coordinated to be truly accidental, too fleeting to name. Sophia leaned a hip against the counter. Tell me something you've never told your mother. Straight to the bone. I exhaled. That's direct. A soft shrug. I learned a long time ago that midnight tea loses its flavor if we talk about the weather. I traced the rim of my mug. I'm scared I'll disappoint her. She keeps telling the neighbors her son is going to be a researcher. Lately I can't even research what I want for breakfast. Sophia nodded as if she'd expected exactly that answer. Steam drifted between us, fogging her glasses for a breath before she pushed them higher on her nose. What would you study? If no one ever asked you to justify it. Neuroscience, I said, surprising myself with the certainty. I like the idea that thoughts leave fingerprints. That even memories that hurt teach the brain new pathways. Her eyes softened, not the polite softness adults offer children, but something weightier. She tapped a spoon against her mug. Thoughts leaving fingerprints. You just left one on me. The kettle clicked off. She poured water with patient precision, never splashing. You know, she murmured, I once delayed art school because everyone said commercial architecture sounded safer. I promised I'd circle back. 18 years later. I still haven't. I pictured her in a drafting studio at 20. Charcoal smudged on cheekbones. Ambition bright. That version of her hovered beside the woman in my kitchen, robe cinched tight to ward off chill she probably felt deeper than the rest of us. Do you regret it? I asked. I regret the silence more than the choice, she said, handing me a tea bag still wrapped in its paper sachet. All the nights I knew the answer but never voiced it. The clock above the fridge ticked a little louder, as if agreeing. I tore the sachet, dropped the leaves into my cup, and watched the water darken, swirl, settle. Sophia's next question skimmed so close to fear I felt it graze skin. If you left grad school, what would people assume about you? That I quit, I said, that I couldn't keep up, and what's the truth? I'm paralyzed by the idea of choosing wrong. Like every decision is a door that locks behind me. The confession felt exposed, but the room was too hushed for half-truths. She inhaled as though tasting the weight of it. Then quietly, doors can be unlocked from the other side. You know. You just need the right hand. I tried to smile, but it faltered. My throat felt tight, words bottling before they met air. Sophia took a tiny step closer, small enough to be safe, close enough that I caught the lavender and paper scent of her robe. Her focus dropped to the knot of my crossed arms. With slow certainty, she reached out and uncrossed them, one forearm at a time. Her palms rested against the counter on either side of me, not touching, but bracketing. A silent blueprint of trust. Does that feel lighter? She asked. It feels unfamiliar, I admitted. Her lips curved. Good. Unfamiliar means you're still capable of surprise. She retreated half a pace to pick up her mug, But the kitchen felt smaller now, boundaries redrawn. Steam ribbon between us again, and I realized my own mug remained untouched, cooling. "Take a sip," she said softly. I did. The tea burned just enough to anchor me. When I lowered the cup, our eyes met across the rising vapor. The moment balanced there, gentle, but precarious, like a note held before the chord resolves. Sophia broke the silence first. "When I'm overwhelmed, I paint what I'm most afraid of losing," she confessed. "It's the only way to keep the shape of it from slipping." I pictured canvases hidden in storage units, maybe an attic somewhere, ghosts of possibilities she never let fade. "What would you paint right now?" I asked. Her gaze flickered to my hands on the mug. "A threshold," she said. "Someone standing at it, deciding whether stepping through will ruin everything or begin it." A faint shiver traveled my spine. I wasn't sure which someone she meant, her, me, or both. Footsteps thudded overhead, my father turning in his sleep. Instinctively, we both stilled, as if eavesdropping on our own guilt. The sounds faded. The hush returned. Sophia exhaled, then reached across the narrow gap and, intending to steady the teapot, brushed the back of my knuckles with hers. The contact lasted half a heartbeat, yet felt deliberate, like punctuation. We both drew back an equal inch, pretending to watch the kettle spout release its final sigh. Neither spoke the obvious, that a single stray touch could change the conversation's temperature faster than hot water. She set her mug down, fingertips tracing a nervous circle on the counter. "I asked you earlier if you were ready for something special," she said. "I didn't mean that as a riddle." "What did you mean?" She searched my face for a long second, eyes reflecting the weak kitchen light, the way glass catches dawn. "I'm renovating a small studio downtown," she said at last. "An old print shop. It's nothing now but dust and cobwebs. I've been going there some nights to paint, to remind myself I still can. But I'm stuck on where to begin." "Why, tell me." Her smile tremored, equal parts hope and caution. "Because you understand fingerprints. Because I think you need a space where choice isn't a trap. Come help me strip the walls, pick the colors, fill the air with whatever you're brave enough to make." I swallowed. The offer felt enormous, like someone handed me the key to a door I'd only drawn in sketches. I wouldn't know where to start by saying yes, she whispered. The house settled again, a soft groan of timber. In that pause, the hallway light flickered, momentary darkness, then glow. I realized my pulse matched its flutter. "I can't promise I won't disappoint you," I said. Sophia shook her head. "Disappoint me tomorrow." "Tonight. Just decide." She extended her hand palm up, patient, no urgency. I stared at it, at the creases catching gold from the stove bulb, at the faint speck of turquoise paint near her wrist she hadn't noticed, and I placed my hand in hers. Warmth flooded faster than nerves could argue. Her fingers closed lightly, neither possessive nor fleeting. Simply present. The kettle clicked again, announcing its own cool down. The cricket song outside seemed to hush. "Listening." Sophia squeezed once assurance, not demand, and released. "Good," she whispered. "Tea's getting cold. We should drink before it loses heart." We stood side by side, elbows almost touching, sipping in silence that felt less like absence and more like promise, each of us holding questions too alive to exhale just yet. By the time we drifted back to my room, the clock read 12:41 a.m., but the night felt outside of time. The tea had cooled in our mugs, untouched since the moment she reached for my hand. Neither of us spoke about it, we just carried that silence with us, the way one carries a warm stone in their pocket, not for function, but for gravity. The light from the hallway stretched a golden sliver across the floor. Sophia paused at the door, one hand on the frame, her eyes scanning the space. She stepped in with quiet deliberation, the way you might enter a memory. Her gaze landed on the quilt folded at the foot of my bed, faded blue squares with uneven stitching and a rip near the hem. I hadn't thought about it in years. It was something I kept without knowing why. "Did your grandmother make this?" she asked, brushing her fingers across the frayed corner. My mom, actually, when I was 9. She said the colors were meant to look like the sea so I'd always have an ocean nearby, even if I never saw one. Sophia smiled, fingers pausing over one threadbare patch. There's something comforting about a gift that's meant to protect you, even when it's not around to see you through. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the quilt over her knees. I hesitated, then joined her, the mattress dipping under our weight. Our knees were close enough to feel the echo of heat, but not close enough to touch. That in-between space felt louder than either of us. I used to sleep under this every night, I said, even in summer. She looked at me not the way adults look at a younger person, but as someone who recognizes a mirror. Because it reminded you someone once believed you needed protecting. I nodded. Her insight felt like a small ache, one I hadn't named aloud until now. There was a quiet moment, and then she spoke again. When I was your age, I almost left everything. I had this wild idea that I'd move to Italy with nothing but sketchbooks and a broken camera. But I didn't. I got married instead. Do you regret it? I asked. The question almost automatic. Sophia didn't answer at first. Her hands found the quilt again, tracing the stitches. I regret the part of me I folded up and stored away. The girl who used to draw rooftops and train stations like she was already living inside them. The image of her young, paint under her nails, wind in her hair suddenly felt close, as if she were sitting beside herself now, the version that never got on that plane. She glanced sideways at me. When I was younger, people praised me for being practical. They said I was wise to settle down, to get real. But I think sometimes, being real becomes the exact thing that steals you away from yourself. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just watched the soft lines of her face, the way her mouth pressed into a near smile that never fully formed. You still have time, I said quietly. So do you, she replied, meeting my eyes. The moment stretched, raw and unguarded, and that's when she said it. I wasn't lying earlier. I've been working on a little studio downtown. It's a wreck, bare walls, paint peeling. But I go there to breathe. I looked at her. You have a studio? She nodded. It was a print shop once. I found it behind a bookstore. They let me lease it cheap because the ceiling leaks in one corner and no one wants to bother fixing it. That sounded exactly like the kind of place where something real could begin. I need help with it, she added, voice barely above a whisper. Not the painting or lifting boxes that I can do. I need someone who knows what it's like to start again without knowing what the end looks like. I felt my pulse in my neck. Why me? Because you've got all this motion in you, even if you think you're stuck. And because I think if you put your hands on something real on wood, paint, wire, it might ground you, or free you. She looked down at her lap. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I just don't want to do it alone. Something about the way she said alone made me ache in a place I didn't have a name for. The offer sat between us like a delicate object vulnerable to misinterpretation, fragile if touched so roughly. You sure it wouldn't be weird? I asked. Sophia tilted her head. Thoughtful. It'd only be weird if we weren't honest. And I'm too tired to lie anymore. I gave a soft laugh more out of nerves than humor and leaned back against the headboard. The quilt pulled between us. One of her hands rested close to mine. Again, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth rising from her skin. It was strange how the smallest spaces held the most meaning. I'd like that, I said finally. To help, too, build something. Sophia looked relieved. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet breath released from somewhere deep. Tomorrow night, after dinner? Yeah, I said. Tomorrow. A silence passed, then one of those silences that lets you know nothing needs fixing, only feeling. I pulled the quilt up between us, and we both smiled without looking at each other. She took a long breath, the kind that suggests something inside is softening. Her shoulder brushed mine. Not enough to startle, just enough to settle. She looked down at the old stitches one last time and whispered, more to herself than me. It's funny what we carry without noticing. I wasn't sure if she meant the quilt, or her regrets, or me, but I understood either way. The print shop hid like a forgotten stanza behind the bookstore, brick facade soot smudged, windows mottled with dust. The first night Sophia led me there, rain-swollen clouds clung low over the city, and the street lamps bled halos onto the wet pavement. I unlocked the warped side door while she balanced two paper bags on her hip. Sandwiches, roller trays, and a battery lantern that rattled like maracas every step. Inside, the place smelled of old ink and damp plaster. Our footsteps stirred motes that spun in the lantern glow like galaxies deciding whether to collapse or expand. Cracked linoleum tiles mapped the floor. Above, exposed rafters crossed like dark ribs. It was, in every sense, a ruin. It was also, undeniably, a beginning. Late-night session one picked opposite walls and started scraping. Metal edges skittered over peeling paint in a syncopated rhythm, her steady, mine impatient. Somewhere between the third and fourth scrape, Sophia hummed a tune I half recognized from car rides with Mom. I joined an off-key. It didn't matter. The room felt large enough to forgive imperfection. Hours slipped by in dust-laden quiet. Ow! And then she'd read aloud the cryptic words stamped behind old posters. Half-price monotype. Extra proofs, as though the walls were gossiping about their past lives. We laughed too loudly, the sound bouncing back at us like we'd woken something asleep for years. Near midnight, she brushed a smear of paint flecks off my cheek with her thumb, absent-minded, like it was the most natural gesture in the world. I felt the heat of her touch long after she turned back to her wall. Late-night session 2 a week later, the air was warmer, and we kept the door propped open to coax in a stray breeze. We rolled primer in sweeping arcs, filling the shop with a milky hush. The fresh white erased decades of nicotine stains until the room looked weightless, as though we'd hollowed out the past and replaced it with breath. Pick a color, Sophia said, handing me a swatch book. Rows of hues flipped beneath her paint-blotted fingers: saffron, persimmon, sea glass. A sliver of pale violet stopped her thumb. Lavender dawn, she read. Too poetic? Just poetic enough, I said, imagining dawn light against those walls, imagining her standing in it. She smiled, small, conspiratorial. Decision made. Late-night session 3 hauled in the gallon cans, pried lids, and stirred pigment until it swirled like twilight inside metal moons. Lavender bled onto rollers, then onto walls, each pass softening the entire shop into something gentler. Our laughter gained an echo. Only fresh paint gives a buoyant sound that told me the room was starting to like its new skin. During a break, Sophia perched on a step-ladder, sipping from a thermos. I sat cross-legged below, tracing shapes in the wet paint with my gaze. Do you still think about Italy? I asked. She rested her chin on the rung. Only when I forget why I stayed, and tonight. She looked down at me, eyes reflecting the lavender in lamplight. Tonight I remember. Nothing else moved. Yet my pulse quickened, the way wind bolts up right before a storm. The night of the rainstorm forecast had promised a drizzle. The sky delivered a deluge. It started with a tinny patter on the roof vents, then became a drumline. Water found the crack near the ceiling light, dripping steadily into a bucket that chimed with each drop. The power flickered, groaned, and surrendered. Darkness folded over us. Absolute. I stood still, hearing my heart beat in my ears. Don't move, Sophia called softly. I heard her rummage, then the strike of a match. A candle bloomed to life, its flame trembling like a startled animal. She lit 2 more, setting them on overturned paint cans between us. The room reshaped itself by candle light, shadows tall and shifting, walls glowing with lavender that looked almost gray in the flicker. Rain hammered overhead, sealing us inside. A private world. Sophia's robe sleeve brushed my arm as she passed me a candle. Looks like we're stranded, she said, half laughing. Yet the laugh carried something fragile, like a piece of glass held up to the light. I set the candle on the windowsill, Wax pulled, flame wavered. We stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing at the new walls as if they were already memories. You realize, she murmured, we've spent more midnights together this month than I have with anyone in years. The confession floated between us. Gilded by firelight, I turned to her. Candle glow curled along her jaw, caught in stray wisps of hair, traced the hollow of her collarbone. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating rain-streaked glass. Does it feel strange? I asked. It feels. She searched for the word, eyes flicking to my mouth, then away. Unfinished, that single syllable felt like a key sliding into a lock I'd been pressing my ear against. My throat tightened. I became acutely aware of how little space separated us, how her breath stirred the fine hairs on my cheek when she exhaled. I reached up without thinking and wiped a lavender smudge from her temple. My thumb lingered, uncertain whether to stay or retreat. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't step back. Raindrops thrummed harder, and applause we hadn't earned yet. Sophia's hand rose, hovering beside my face, fingers trembling in the candle's pulse. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, nothing more than that, yet the contact felt seismic, as though the studio's freshly painted walls tilted to keep us from falling. I felt the question before I asked it, shared in the hush of her shallow breath. Is this the moment? I leaned in, not a decision, but a tide pulling. She did the same. The distance shrank to millimeters, candlelight reflecting in twin pairs of half-closed eyes. I could smell the faint trace of mint tea on her lips, could feel the softness of her exhale against my mouth, and then she stopped. I stopped. We hovered, suspended, held apart by something invisible yet unmistakably strong. Respect, fear, or be the knowledge that naming a moment too soon can break it. Her eyes met mine, steady despite the tremor in her breathing. She gave the slightest shake of her head, not yet, and I understood. A whisper of a smile crossed my lips, mirrored on hers, both of us acknowledging desire without letting it scorch what we'd spent nights building. The storm outside raged on, but inside we'd found a quieter thunder, the kind that doesn't demand destruction, only attention. Sophia rested her forehead against mine, a gesture more intimate than a kiss. Her hand slid down to clasp my paint-stained fingers. We stood that way, eyes closed, sharing breath and candle warmth, until the rain softened and the world decided it was safe to exhale again. Finally, she spoke, voice rough with relief and longing. Let's finish these walls in the morning. Lavender looks even better at dawn. I opened my eyes to the faintest pale blur spidering across the eastern windows. Dawn, indeed, was coming. The walls, the life still needed color. Boundary, time, lavender dawn. I echoed, we'll see it together. Outside, the downpour eased to a hush. Inside, candle flames steadied, and somewhere among fresh paint, damp air, and our foreheads still touching, I realized that beginning did not always require crashing through a door. Sometimes it was enough to stand before one, listening, waiting, hand in hand until the right light spilled under the jamb. The rain had dwindled to hush by the time we locked the studio. Dawn waited just beyond the rooftops, rinsing the sky in the faintest pewter. Sophia and I walked the 4 blocks to my street without speaking, hands occasionally brushing like birds, testing the same invisible current. Every shopfront was shuttered, neon signs sleeping behind dark glass, puddles reflecting us in lavender smears that flickered with passing headlights. At my gate she stopped. Water beaded on loose strands of her hair, catching what little gray blue light the morning offered. For a breath we stood inside the ache of the almost kiss, the knowledge that closeness could exist without conclusion and still feel whole. She touched my sleeve, tugged a fleck of dried paint from the cuff, then let her hand fall. Sleep, she whispered. And tomorrow we'd choose the second coat. I finished, smiling. We both knew tomorrow meant more than paint. She nodded once, then turned, crossing the empty street toward her car. I watched until her taillights vanished around the corner, a red comet swallowed by the dim. The gift house still dozed in pre-dawn gloom. Floorboards sighed under my socks, The grandfather clock in the hall muttered a tired quarter-hour chime. I moved as a guest in my own childhood, every door handle, every light switch a memory. In my room I paused, surprised to feel the air change, warmer somehow. That's when I saw it. On the desk, beneath the brass lamp my father once repaired, lay a package wrapped in brown butcher paper, tied with a thin white ribbon. No note, no signature, only a damp half-moon on the corner where rain must have kissed it during the walk-in. I knew whose hands had folded those neat edges. I peeled the paper back. A hard-cover sketchbook emerged, linen spine, smooth charcoal gray boards. I opened to the first page and found a single line in ink the color of midnight tea. Fill these with what you're brave enough to feel. My breath stalled. The words were not instruction, but permission. A key slipped under a door no one else knew was locked. I traced the curve of each letter, the way you test a railing after the storm, making sure it will hold. The remaining pages were blank, pristine as freshly poured plaster, yet pulsing with possibility. I closed the cover gently, afraid sound alone could smudge them. Dawn unfolding outside my window, the sky lightened from pewter to pearl. Birds began their tentative rehearsal, first one, then a scatter of them, cautious at the edge of day. Through the thin walls I heard Mom stirring, the rattle of a cabinet, the strike of the burner, water filling the kettle, just as it had while Sophia and I stood in that lavender room hours earlier. I left the sketchbook on the desk center, ribbon coiled beside it like a spent question, and stretched across the bed fully clothed. I didn't intend to sleep. I wanted only to feel the shift inside my chest settle into shape. But exhaustion gathered me anyway, quick as low tide. When I blinked awake again, sunlight was a warm blade across the floorboards. Voices drifted up the stairwell, Mom and Dad debating toast versus parada, a Saturday ritual. The normalcy felt almost absurd, like a stage set resetting after the actors have broken character. I sat up, reached automatically for my phone, then stopped. Instead, I took the sketchbook to the window seat. Light spilled over my shoulder, bright enough now to ghost the linen weave of the paper. I opened to page 2, uncapped a black pen, and waited. Nothing came at first, just the tremor of my pulse. In my wrist, I thought of the studio's lavender walls, the candle's wavering flame reflected in Sophia's iris, the rain that kept time with our breathing. I thought of my own stalled plans, of doors I'd let locked behind me. The pen touched paper, a line appeared, the outline of a doorway, slightly ajar, dawnlight spilling through. Simple, almost childlike, yet the moment the ink dried, my chest eased, as if the drawing had excavated a pocket of air in lungs I hadn't fully filled in years. Household stir, ring, a gentle knock. Mom peeked in, hair braided down her back, apron already dusted with flour. "You're up early," she said, noticing the sketchbook. "Couldn't sleep." I replied, a truth inside a larger truth she didn't need yet. She followed my gaze to the page. Drawing again, she sounded relieved, the way people do when an old habit resurfaces like proof a lost river still runs underground. "Trying," I said. She smiled, soft and proud, then asked if I wanted breakfast. I told her I'd be down in a minute. When the door closed, I turned back to the sketchbook and, beneath the doorway, wrote a single caption in small deliberate letters. Some stories begin after the door closes. The sentence felt less like a conclusion than an opening chord. Permisolator, with coffee warming my hands. I stepped onto the back porch. Early sun painted the yard gold. Dew gleamed on Mom's forgotten herb pots. The world smelled of wet earth and basil and something electric, like the air after distant thunder. Sophia had said tomorrow, but tomorrow suddenly felt too far. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over her number. Then I set it down, choosing instead the silence she and I understood. A plan without words. I imagined us in the studio that evening, windows propped, lavender walls catching sunset, our brushes tracing second coats while records rasped on an ancient turntable we'd find at a thrift store. I imagined laughter echoing again, and maybe, only maybe, the courage for our mouths to meet without rain pounding warning on the roof. A small ache bloomed beneath my ribs, equal parts want and wonder. It felt nothing like fear used to feel. It felt like momentum, footsteps, waking inside. Dad switched on the radio. A host announced weekend headlines in a voice so brisk for 8 a.m. Car doors slammed to houses down. Neighbors beginning their errands. The world, eternally unbothered by private epiphanies, carried on. Yet everything looked edged in new light, as if someone had dialed up the saturation on ordinary life. I ran my thumb over paint still clinging to my knuckles. Lavender turned chalky against skin. Evidence. Proof that last night had happened beyond the mutable haze of memory. At the kitchen table, Mom said an extra mug beside mine, steam spiraling like the candle smoke had hours earlier. Big plans today? She asked, unaware of the constellation reforming behind my eyes. Yeah, I said, picturing the studio key cool in my pocket. I think I'll help a friend repaint, start something new. Well, she laughed, pain has a way of getting everywhere. World clothes. I promised I would, but I was already halfway out the door and thought, a sketchbook under my arm, dawn at my back, and a single exhilarating certainty in my pulse. I have pages to fill, and a hand to hold steady while I do. As the screen door tapped shut behind me, morning finally broke open. The house, my house, her house, our unfinished story had woken, and somewhere 2 blocks over, I imagined Sophia stepping into daylight the same way, eyes narrowed against brightness, heart widened by what we hadn't yet said. Trusting the lavender dawn we'd painted was proof enough that beginnings often arrive quietly, on the solace of shoes still damp with rain. I walked down the steps, sketchbook pressed to chest, and breathed in the ordinary street with an extraordinary lungful of air. The day smelled like wet paper and blooming things, like ink poised above an empty page, like possibility finding its shape. Some stories, I realized, require no audience to begin, only to people courageous enough to close one door, face the hush that follows, and step across a threshold drawn in lavender light, and that, at last, felt brave enough to feel.